All right, we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome online. At the end, I will go over some of the things coming up, but because we're getting started kind of late, I will let Zippy go ahead and start it. So Zippy's our teacher. Do you just want to, do you want to frame for everybody one time, like how we chose the topics for lunch and learn and how we got to the topic? Sure. That could be. So, over the summer, I attended an 18 by 18 conference, like the 18 Jewish things every Jewish person should know by the time they're 18. And so I met with, well, Zippy and I met with Heather and Sharon, and we looked at these 18 and we picked out the ones that we thought would be most valuable to you as teachers. So that's kind of how we framed all of our LOMED classes. So each of them fall under one of those 18 things. So today is the evolution of Jewish law. And while maybe you might not be able to take this back to your little ones to teach them, it's really good background to have. And it might help you know why you're teaching some of the things you're teaching. Does that make sense?
Part 1 or 2, no one diagrams teaching the other?
No.
It just,
Yeah.
okay. We kind of went back and forth, I wanted to make sure. Yeah, so I want to reiterate to all of you that I don't necessarily know that this is going to be helpful in the classroom, especially if you teach little kids. But in terms of like your own background and understanding Judaism, hopefully it will be helpful. It's a lot of information and I'm gonna try not to just be talking and get you guys talking. So please stop me and ask me questions because I don't want this to be dry. Jews are sometimes called the people of the book. Have you heard that? Yeah, people of the book?
I heard they call them God's chosen people.
We've been told that as well. I think one of the reasons we're called the people of the book, if you know anything about Jewish history, we started out really as a tribe, like we were a tribal people, right? And then in our earliest years, we were very connected to the land, right? We were connected to the land of Israel, and there was a temple there, and it was destroyed, and then there was a second temple there, and then that was destroyed. And our religion, up until the destruction of the second temple, was very focused on being in Israel, on agriculture, on being in the temple. It was very land-based. It was very specifically connected to being in the land of Israel. Then the second temple was destroyed and we were dispersed all over the world. And you would think we'd stop existing. Like really, for a religion to be so connected to a place and a people to be so connected to a place and then we're kicked out of the place, like what's left? And what was left was being the people of the book. And our religion really shifted from that time forward to being very focused on Jewish learning and Jewish text. And we're going to talk about what all those texts are, because those texts went with us everywhere we went. I don't want to get onto a political discussion, but just so you know, our connection to the land of Israel has lasted from then until now. And from then until now, there have always been some Jews living in the land of Israel. So it's not like that disappeared. It was still a part of who we were. But the majority of Jews were exiled from Israel for 2,000 years and we're not there. And the religion continued. And the religion continued because of this connection to Jewish learning and Jewish text. This is also why you will often hear, I don't think it's a stereotype, I think it's true, about commitment of Jews to education, right? So if you look at actually Israel, right, where half the Jews in the world live, there are more PhDs per capita than anywhere in the world. Right? Jews are very, very connected to education. Whether you're talking about Jewish education or general education, like it is a very high priority. And I think it's because of the connection to the book, being the people of the book. So when we talk about the book, what are we talking about? So that's what today is going to be about. Can I have the we're going to look at this in 4 ways. I'm going to start with sharing my screen. This is one kind of metaphor you sometimes see about when we're talking about Jewish law. It says the sea of halakha. It's a map, so to speak, of all the Jewish important texts and sort of where they developed in different places. It's one way of kind of looking in general at Jewish law and text. Another way you can look at it is this, which is more chart-based, more of a map. And we're gonna come back to this and look at it as we talk about some of the different things, but I just wanted you to have kind of that general view. But we're going to start with the Torah. We're starting right over here, this pink box, the written Torah, that's where we're starting. Stop sharing, so I can see you. So everybody should have in front of you this, okay? If you look at just page 1 and page 2, okay? I would say these are the most key books in Jewish law. Notice how long it is. For each one of these books, there are lots and lots of rabbis who have written other books saying what these books mean. And in many cases, there are rabbis who have written books about what other rabbis wrote about these books. Okay? When Orthodox Jews get married, the most important thing they get as wedding presents, more than the dishes and the towels and the sheets and everything else, are holy books, right? Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars spent on these books. And actual written books, not just learning them online, because these books are so important. So we're going to talk about these books and how they connect to each other and how they connect to Jewish law. But I want you to think about American jurisprudence, American law, right? American law is built about on 2 different things. What would you say American law is built? What?
Fairness.
Fairness, for sure. Like, but how do we get the laws? Where do the laws come from? Ancestors in the US. Who makes the laws? The government, right? The Senate and the House make laws. But in order for those laws to stand and be okay law, they're checked against what? What's the check and balance? What could make a law that the government would pass illegal? Right now, to be very political, right now, President Trump has said he wants to make it so somebody who's born in the US to a non-citizen is not a citizen. And is being challenged in the courts. Why? What do they say?
It's against the law.
That is against the
Law.
Constitution. Okay, so any laws that are passed by the House and Senate have to fit with the Constitution. Right? If it goes against the Constitution, then you've got this, and that's why you can balance them out. Okay? So if we think about Jewish law that way, the Constitution is the Torah. Right? Anything that is in Jewish law that goes against the Torah, that goes absolutely against the Torah, is going to be ruled out for Jewish law. Okay, so the Torah says there's one God, right? So if the rabbis had come around and tried to make a law saying there are 5 gods, that'd be out, right? It would absolutely be ruled out for sure, can't be. So where we start is the written law. The written law is the Torah, okay? And the Torah, if you look at these little pictures, these nice little pictures, and we can send this out because all the underlined ones all have hyperlinks. These 5 books, okay, are the written Torah. You've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So any of you who know the Christian Bible, those are the same first 5 books, right? In Hebrew, just so we can have that, they're called Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. We're going to go back through and talk about what's in there. But that's the first 5 books. And according to Jewish tradition, those are the things that God said to Moses on Mount Sinai, and Moses wrote down. That's what's in the 5 books of the Torah. They are the same. They're the same, they're written in the same Hebrew words wherever you are, right? If you look at a Torah scroll, that's what's written inside of a Torah scroll in Hebrew. And it doesn't matter if the Torah scroll is in China or in Israel or Milwaukee, it's exactly the same. The columns are the same. They start with the same word in the same place. My son-in-law, by the way, right now is studying to be a scribe, to be a person who writes Torah scroll. Very cool. Some point, once he's really mastered it, we'll bring him to come do a lunch and learn. So those are the words in those 5 books. According to Jewish tradition, and we're going to get to this more, but according to Jewish tradition, at the same time as God said all these words to Moses that Moses wrote down, God also gave all this oral teachings, oral law, to Moses that didn't get written down for a long time. And we're gonna get to where that oral law was, but according to tradition, in addition to the written part, God taught Moses these oral teachings, and Moses taught Aaron, and Aaron taught like the Joshua, and it got passed down orally for a long time until we were worried it would get forgotten and it got written down, okay? So, first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's in any Bible you're gonna pick up, Jewish or Christian. The differences are gonna be in the translation, right? So, and there are mistakes in translation. I just got it, but what did they say? That saying that reading something in translation is like kissing through a blanket or something, some quote like this.
So true.
Right? You lose stuff, right? And in terms of like the King James Bible, probably one of the most famous translations, that Bible was translated from Hebrew into Greek and Greek into Latin and Latin into English. Not a good way to translate something, right? So the most famous mistake is, have any of you guys ever seen the statue of by Michelangelo of Moses? It's a very famous statue of Moses done by Michelangelo, right? He's got horns. Okay, Hebrews don't have horns, in case you thought they did, don't have horns. Where did this come from? It was not just like a random thing. In the Bible, when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, it says that after seeing God face to face, that he had rays of light coming from his head. Rays was mistranslated from the Hebrew to the Greek to the Latin to the English into points. This is where there are people who still think, when I was a freshman in college, I had a non-Jewish roommate from a small town and she really wanted to see my points. That was the first Jew she had ever met. All because of this mistranslation. So I just want to say that. So that if you pull out different versions of the Bible with different translations, it might not happen. Okay, what is the next section of the Bible? Okay, in Hebrew, we call the Bible, we don't call it the Old Testament. Why do you think we don't call it the Old Testament?
We don't have a new one.
Because we don't have a new one. So I can have an old one if you don't have a new one. So we call it either the Hebrew Bible, or in Hebrew, we call it Tanakh, which is an acronym, right? Like USA. Tanakh stands for 3 words. Torah, which is of course Bible future. Nevi'im, which are the prophets, about a minute, and Ketuvim, which are the writings, which is a 3rd section. So in any Tanakh, in any Hebrew Bible, you will see the 5 books, that Torah, the prophets, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the writings. And you would find that in any Christian Bible as well, right? It's just when the Christian Bible, you're gonna have all that, plus you're gonna have a whole bunch of stuff that we don't have in the Hebrew Bible. Good, glad that was helpful. Okay, so the second section of the Bible, if you open up any Bible, is Navi, which is the prophets. Okay, so that's in the middle of your sheet here, where you see starting in Joshua all the way to Malachi. You guys heard of some of these? Does sound familiar? Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Hosea, Amos. Does this sound familiar? Ezekiel? Yeah, okay. So that happened from the time that the Jews left after they were wandering the desert for 40 years, from the time they went into the land of Israel, Joshua led them in, right? Into the next many years through Malachi. And really, it goes through the history of what happened to the Jewish people as they were settling in the land and through the 1st and 2nd kings of Israel and etc. The last section, Ketuvim writings, are actually, much of it is scrolls, right? In Jewish, there's a Torah scroll with the two rollers, right? But there are other scrolls that are just on one roll. The most famous scroll is Megillat Esther, right? That's the most famous scroll, Megillah. That's in the writings, okay? But there are a bunch of others. The Psalms, maybe you've heard of Psalms. Psalms are read a lot, I think, in churches as well, right? Psalms, Proverbs, the book of Job. So there are a whole bunch of other things that are in there. We're going to go through these a little more, but I'm trying to give you the big overview. Okay, that's the end of the Tanakh. That's the end of the Jewish Bible. Okay. Interestingly, there are parts about Jewish life that are included in the Christian Bible sometimes that aren't a part of our Bible. So the book of Maccabees and the 2nd book of Maccabees, both of them are often a part of a Christian Bible. And the rabbis, when they codified and they said, this is in and this is out, this is the Bible, didn't include the book of Maccabees. So that's kind of interesting. So there's some other things besides the New Testament, which you might see in a Christian Bible and not in a Jewish Bible. Everybody with me so far? Because that's a lot of stuff. Any questions?
What is it? Any questions?
Questions? Yes, seriously, I want to stop for a minute. So now we're getting back to the oral law, the oral tradition. Okay, there is a lot about the Bible that does not make any sense without the oral traditions that have been passed down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. There's some things that are so fundamental in what Judaism is that we would not understand without. Okay, let me give you an example. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So what is it? It's a mezuzah. But does it tell us that? The word mezuzah is right, is there, right? But it doesn't tell us what a mezuzah is. Okay? The worst book by far I've ever read in my entire life, one of 2 books ever that I threw in the garbage can, was a book called The Year of Living Biblically. And there was this guy who decided to do everything in the Bible literally for a year and write a book about it. And it was ridiculous. But so what did he do? He took it literally. He said, "Oh, write them on the doorposts of your house and your gates." And so he took a Sharpie and he went over to his door and he wrote a bunch of Hebrew words from the Bible on his door. Okay? Other than that goofy guy, that's what you see. You see on mezuzah over here, right? You see this case that could look a lot of different ways with a scroll that has those words from the Bible in it. But if you didn't see that, you wouldn't know what that was, right? And there are also things that you might take literally if nobody explained it to you. So for example, it says in the Bible, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you took that literally, what would you think that meant?
Put somebody eye out.
Somebody puts your eye out, you can put their eye out. And there are times in history that the world has done that, right? Hammurabi's code, like they literally would like do that. That's never what the Torah meant. Okay, what did they mean? According to the oral tradition that's been passed down, it's a monetary value, right? If somebody pokes your eye out, we need the lawyers to come around and say, what is eyesight worth, right? If somebody's 20 years old, their eye might be worth more than if they're, 99 years old, whatever. And then you had to pay a monetary restitution. It wasn't that you get to poke somebody else's eye out, which hope you're all glad to know, because you're teachers, you don't want, oh, he hit me, I get to hit him back. It's not what it means. So if you don't have these oral traditions, there are so many things that we don't understand. So until the year 600 CE, right, 600 AD, this oral tradition was passed from one person to another, to another, to another. And finally, the people realized they were going to lose it. Like this just, you think about the game of telephone, whatever, that they weren't enough people passing it along, that were going to lose it. And so they wrote it down. But they wrote it down kind of in a shorthand type of way because they really wanted to keep that oral element, because there's something really special, and lots of different cultures have like an oral tradition, right? And they didn't want to lose that ability to connect and to have a teacher. So they wrote out the Mishnah. It's almost like an outline for it. And if you don't have somebody explaining to you what it means and what the background is, you're really not going to understand it. So like if you took notes when you're sitting in a class like this, right, that might help you understand it, but somebody else might not know what your notes mean, right? So they set it up in a way that, okay, this is the basic outline so we don't forget, but you need a teacher to help. But then the rabbis came along and said, okay, as the years followed, that's great that we've got this basic skeletal outline and we're teaching our students, etc. But we're having these really great discussions about what all of this means. Let's write that all down. And so they wrote down, so they wrote it down. They wrote it down what's called the Talmud. So this middle section, here is the Mishnah. This is the part that was written down in 600 CE. And then they said, okay, the rabbis are having a great discussion about what this means, and we're going to write it on the outside of the page. So one rabbi's stuff is over here. And a different rabbi's stuff is over here. And then the different rabbis are going to add some stuff over here, but what they mean, and a different rabbi is going to put stuff over here, what that means, and somebody else is going to put stuff over here, what this means. And let's see, And if we look, oops. Okay, this kind of shows you color coded, right? This is the Mishnah from 200 CE. This is the Gemara added in 500 CE. This is the comments from Rashi in this year. This is comments, these are different comments on the comments on the comments on the comments on the comments. And by the way, then you can buy whole other books that are commenting on all of this. So there is so much to learn because when you have 3 Jews, you have 5 opinions. And this is where this comes from, but this is all a part of the process of learning. So when somebody says, I'm going to study Torah, sometimes they mean very specifically, literally, I'm going to study from those first 5 books that we were talking about in the beginning. But often they mean Torah can also mean teachings, learning. I'm going to study Torah. It could mean any of those things that we just talked about, any of the things on this page and this page. So there's a lot. Yes.
How do they decide who gets to like be
Where are the pages?
commentators? Like who often is like, okay, yes, your opinion does matter. This is a good discussion. Let's put it in. That's not good enough. We don't want it.
That's a great question. Some of it is by proximity, right? So very often the people who lived, the longer ago they lived, the more credence they're given because they're closer to the time, right?
Okay.
So that this understanding that they're closer to the time. And there were these just great scholars who sat all day and learned together and they taught one another. And some of them just became really, really prolific in understanding. So you see here Rashi, that's the one in blue, okay? Rashi has done a commentary on virtually every single verse in the entire Bible and on the Talmud. And he is like, a lot of people, especially Orthodox Jews, will not study any Jewish text unless they have Rashi side by side. So Abigail, we were talking earlier that you're studying Torah, and I refrained from saying this, but some people would say, if you're gonna sit down and study Torah, you've got to have Rashi right next to it. Because to just try and read it and not understand it without Rashi, you know, you need that. But what's most interesting, I think, is to see the comparisons between them, because they don't always agree. In fact, they usually don't. And so there are 2 of the famous people you rabbis you hear discussing the most in the Bible are Hillel and Shammai. You've probably heard of Rabbi Hillel, like Hillel Milwaukee and Bader Hillel Academy, all named after Hillel. Very smart rabbi, right? And he and Shammai argued all the time, They almost never agreed. And I do want to tell you though, they were friends. And it says that their children married each other. You know, they left the study hall where they were arguing voraciously and, you know, went to dinner at each other's houses. Almost always, the way we interpret the law today follows Hillel. But they say that in the time of the Messiah someday, that we're going to follow Shammai. We're not going to follow Hillel. So they preserved all these minority opinions, which again, if you go back to the Supreme Court, right? Our laws all have to agree with the Constitution, but it's often the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. And you can go back since the beginning of our country and look back at the opinions that the Supreme Court gave. And usually there's a majority opinion, but there's often a minority opinion. And when a case comes up later, they're going to go back and look at it, right? So whatever the case is, whether it's about prayer in school or abortion or who's a citizen or any of the many laws, right? They're going to go back and say, what does the Constitution say? What do other Supreme Court cases say? They're also going to look at case law. By the way, my brother is a law professor, so it's not a lot, right? They're going to, when you're in law school, you study all this case law and how were things decided and whatever. It's a very similar process. We're always looking back. And in Jewish law, you have to do this because there are so many things that come up in the world today that didn't exist in the time before, right? Can you drive in a car on the Sabbath? Well, there weren't any cars in the time of the Bible. So the rabbis they look back at what did the Talmud say? What is this? You can't light a fire on Shabbat. So is starting a car lighting a fire? Like, you know, you couldn't ride a horse. So can you ride in a car? And there are just these great discussions, and more books are still being published, right? There are a lot of great rabbis today whose, you know, opinions are published. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So is there like, I don't want to equate it to like the Pope, but is there a group of people like rabbis that sit and like decide these things? Like right now?
Excellent question. Yes, and, okay. So at the time when the temple was still standing, there was a court called the Sanhedrin. And it was 70 judges, and they would judge different cases. And they had the power to make a decision that affected the whole Jewish world. So it wasn't one person like the Pope, but it was like this group of people that are making decisions, whatever they decided, affect everyone.
Okay.
Since the destruction of the temple, we don't have that. So in some times in history and in some places, there's been a rabbi who's in charge of a community, right? For example, maybe you've heard of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who for a long time was the head rabbi in England.
Yes.
Like, so he was like in charge of that. Israel has two head rabbis, one's Ashkenazi and one's Sephardi, those are like parts of the world. So there are different times where there's a rabbi, but there's not really the same, there's not one person who's in charge of all Jews anymore,
Okay.
which is all the more reason why they look back to this. But there are great scholars and people will look to their rabbi, right? So you might look to your, like I might look, if I have a question, I accidentally used my dairy spoon with my meat, soup. What do I do with the spoon? Like, is the spoon okay? Is the soup okay? Like, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna call up my rabbi and I'm gonna say, is this okay? Is this not okay, et cetera? And he's gonna give me an opinion. But sometimes if I ask him a really tough question, he's gonna go ask his rabbi. He's like, I'm not sure. I'm gonna go and check with somebody who knows Jewish law better than me. So there's kind of this like hierarchy, and this is within, I would say, Orthodox Judaism and conservative Judaism as well. Also kind of has these laws and standards. I would say in Reform Judaism, it's kind of more up to people to interpret things the way they.
Okay.
More questions?
Can I just say though, the rabbis are not like average people that decide to become a rabbi. These were like extremely great, not of normal minds, like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
higher up, where people have been studying forever and ever. And in terms of the people like going back in time, there's a sense of that they have Ruach HaKodesh, that they have like divine inspiration, that they're being like they're being guided in their understanding from a holier place than just.
Got it.
More questions? So let's dig in a little bit more.
Yeah.
So if you look at page 3, I just want to give you, I'm going to try and go through some of these different books and give you like a little snippet of each one. You could spend a lifetime studying any of these books. So here we go. Let's start with the Torah, which is those 5 books, okay? So it's very interesting. The English names of each of those books and the Hebrew ones don't necessarily match up. Any book in the Torah, and actually any Torah portion, because the Torah is divided up into 54 portions. The name of each portion is based on the first significant word in that Torah portion, okay? I'm not gonna say the first word, because otherwise, like, you wouldn't call it the. Like, if every chapter was called the, it wouldn't be helpful. But like the first significant word. And the books each get their name from the name of the first Torah portion of that book. Okay, but the names that we give them in English/Greek, depending which one, is more about the theme of the book. Okay, so for example, Genesis, what does the word Genesis mean? It's about creation, right? It's about literally we call it Bereshit in Hebrew. Bereshit means in the beginning, okay? Genesis has to do with about like the creation of things, so they're pretty well tied. Genesis starts with the creation of the first human being. It's about the creation of the world. And it's very interesting that this holy book to Jews doesn't start out with Jews. It starts out with everybody. Adam is the ancestor of all human beings, right? And why? Because all human beings are holy, right? We're all created in God's image. We're all really important. So it starts out with the history of all of humanity. So it starts there and it goes just until the Israelites are about to enter Egypt. And that's the whole first. Second book of the Torah is a great example of how they don't fit together is Exodus. What does Exodus mean? Leaving, right? It's related to the word exit, right? And so it's about going out of, it's really, most of it is settled while we were in Egypt and then going out of Egypt. But the Hebrew word for it is shmot, which means names. Because that Torah portion starts out with a list of names of all the people who went down into Egypt, right? So they're not connected really. So it's interesting to know. So it's about what life was like in Egypt from the time we were down there, we became slaves, and then freed and then leaving. That's a book of Exodus. 10 Commandments are also given in the book of Exodus. Golden Calf is in Exodus, really famous stuff. Okay, next book, Leviticus. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that's Greek or Latin or Greek, I think Greek, is called in Hebrew Vayikra. Okay, Leviticus has to do with the word Leviim, who were the tribe that helped out the priests. They were the ones that took care of the tabernacle as they were wandering around the desert. So if you ever met anybody named Levine or Levi or Lev, those are people that are descended from that tribe. So this book is called Leviticus in English because, or in whatever it is, Greek, because it's so much focused on the tabernacle, on sacrifice, on the laws of how we worship through sacrifice. In Hebrew, it's called Vayikra, which means and he called, which again is just about the beginning of the word. It's mostly about laws. There's a whole section in there called Parshat Kedoshim, the holiness codes about how to be a good human being and how we treat each other. My favorite part of that book. And a lot of stuff about animal sacrifices, a lot of details. Then you get to Numbers, okay? Why is the book of Numbers called Numbers? Because a bunch of times in this book, they take a census to find out how many people are wandering around in the desert. Bamidbar means in the desert, because this part takes place in the desert, and it's the time they're wandering around the desert for 40 years. And then you get to Devarim. Devarim means things, literally. It could also be words. And Deuteronomy, I'm pretty sure has to do with like reviewing laws. I think that's where the word comes from. And it really kind of reviews everything in the Torah up until that point. Okay, and ends with the death of Moses. I don't want to get into it now because I'm not an expert in it, but I will mention that there are people who look at the five books of the Bible with literary criticism, and will say that based on the way the language was written, that they can see different authors. They think they were written at different times by different authors and put together. I am not an expert on biblical criticism, but there are also really interesting books written about that and why some language is used in different places. Okay. The Torah, those 5 books, is also sometimes called a Chumash. The Chumash literally talks about when you get it in book form, not the scroll, but if you have a book, like you go to synagogue and you're reading along, the book is called Chumash. It comes from the word Chamesh, which means 5, because there are 5. It's called in Greek the Pentateuch, which also means 5. Septuagint is when the Torah was translated into Greek, so that has to do with that translation. So it's a kind of, you might hear it called the Chumash, the Pentateuch, the Septuagint. It's all the same thing. Okay. The Torah is compared to a whole bunch of different things in Jewish texts. I just thought it would be interesting since we're talking about this. Sometimes it's compared to fire. And I actually just, when I was studying with Bina last night, one of you there, I was reading a text about this. It was really, really interesting. It says, why is the Torah compared to fire? And it says, if you have one stick, it's not easy to light on fire, but if you have a whole bunch of kindling together, it's much easier to light. So when you have a bunch of people studying Torah together, that's how you're able to really learn. That's how you build the fire and then you learn, etc. It's compared to water, right? They say there's a whole thing about that a Jew without Torah is like a fish out of water. Like we can't breathe without it. We need it to exist. Sometimes compared to wine, oil, to milk, right? Like again, we're nourished from it. It's compared to honey with its sweetness, it's compared to manna, like what we ate in the Torah. And most often we hear it called the tree of life, right? It's Chaim, right? That it's the very center of who we are. And if you think about a tree with all its branches, the Torah is definitely our roots and our trunk, right? Without the Torah, we don't know. Few more things. According to Jewish tradition, the Torah before we got it was offered to every other nation on earth before us. God went to each nation and said, hey, do you want the Torah? And one nation said, what's in it? And God said, don't murder. And they're like, oh, we don't want that. That's like, we're warrior people with it. And God went to the next people and said, do you want the Torah? And they said, what's in it? They said, don't steal. And they're like, oh, forget it. That's how we make our living. And then God went to all 69 other nations before us, and each one asked what was in it, heard something about it, and said, no deal. finally, we were the only ones left, that God came to us and said, hey, Jews, do you want the Torah? And we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. In other words, bring it on. God, it's from you, we want it, and after we take it, then you can explain to us what. That's how we got the Torah. That's one story. The other story simultaneously, so it's like, oh, don't think that we're better than anybody else. We were God's last choice. The other story says that God came to us at the mount and we were at Mount Sinai. And God lifted up Mount Sinai like an overturned bowl, held it over the heads of the Jewish people and said, do you want the Torah? In other words, if you don't know how to drop Mount Sinai on you. And we all looked up and said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it, we will listen, right? So you got like, yeah, we were God's last choice, but we took it, or yeah, we took it because God forced us into it. These struggles with why God gave us. The Torah is considered eternal, right? I told you before, if any other law comes against the Torah, it's not okay. And the Torah actually says you can't add or detract from the Torah. You can't change it. So it's like an internal permanent thing. Some people say the Torah even existed before God created the world. But on the other hand, and this is really important and actually explains why all the rest of this exists, is that God told us that the Torah is for us to interpret, right? There's this great story in the Talmud where these rabbis are arguing about whether an oven is kosher or not. And they're arguing back and forth, and one rabbi says, okay, if the law is with me, let this stream start flowing upstream, like flow backwards. And the thing flows backwards. And the other rabbi's like, that doesn't prove anything. And the rabbi's like, if the law is with me, let that tree get up and move from here to here. And the tree gets up and moves from here to here. And the rabbi's like, that doesn't prove it. The rabbi says, if the Torah is with me, let the walls of the house of study fall down where we are. And they start caving in, but then the other rabbi kind of looks up and out of respect, they don't cave in. And finally, the rabbi says, okay, if the law is with me, let a voice from heaven prove it. And a voice comes down from heaven and says, he's right. And the other rabbi responds, Lo b'shamayim, it's not in heaven. The Torah is not in heaven. That's actually a quote from the Torah. It says the Torah is not in heaven. What does this mean? God gave us the Torah, then we got to figure out what it means. And so the rabbis are going to argue it out. And by the way, majority ruled. And it's not up to God to say so. By the way, God's response to that was to laugh and say, my children got the better of me. Like they figured it out. So Torah is for us to interpret. Talked about the lots. How many commentaries? All right, as I mentioned before, it's divided up into 54 portions, right? How many weeks are there in a year? 52, okay? Every single week in synagogue, Jews around the world read one section of the Torah. We start after Simchat Torah with Genesis, the first section of Genesis, and we move through it. It takes us the whole year to get through until we get back to Simchat Torah and we start over. What is so cool is no matter where you are in the world, they're reading the same portion. So I was in Israel a couple weeks ago, they were reading the same thing as we were reading in Milwaukee. They were reading the same thing in South Africa and in Korea, and I'm pointing in the wrong places. Everyone in the world is reading the same thing, which is very, very cool. Takes a whole year to get through it. A leap year in Jewish law, which is a different class, adds a whole month, 7 out of every 19 years. And so those weeks, we read one portion each week. When it's not a leap year, sometimes we read 2 portions at once. The rabbis are very kind to us and try to give us the shorter portions to put together. Not in synagogue too. All right, so we talked about, in general, we talked about Tanakh being an acronym. I didn't tell you though that the canonization, that like the what's going to be in and what's going to be out was done by Ezra and Nehemiah, who are 2 prophets, in 444 BC. So that's when it was kind of closed. So Nevi'im is prophecy about the prophets. Here's so prophecy ended about the time of Alexander the Great, right? 332 BC. What are prophets? A prophet is a messenger from God. God gives a human being a message for us, and that's prophets. So anything after that really wasn't a part of the prophets. We talked about most of this. Book of Judges, very interesting thing. Basically what happens is the Jews are worshiping idols. A judge comes around and they start getting conquered by their enemies because they're worshiping idols. They pray for forgiveness. God sends a judge to help them. They defeat their enemies, and then it starts all over and over. And then you get through the Book of Kings. All right, Kittovim, real quickly, in there, in the writings, you've got Job. You guys read Job? Job is a really tough book. You guys read the book of Job? Yes, no? Basically has God and Satan, like this angel, right? Who is somebody who's opposing God, basically making a bet about Job. Job is this really righteous, good guy, and Satan says, yeah, but if bad things happen to him, he won't believe in you anymore. And God says, yes, he will. And so they make all these horrible things happen to him. His children die, his wife dies, he gets leprosy, like horrible, he loses all his money, like horrible things happen to him. He doesn't turn away from God. And in the end, you know, basically the Satan loses the bet, God wins the bet, whatever that means, and he gets to start over his life again. But it's this book that really kind of asks the question about suffering and why people suffer, really tough stuff. The Psalms are in there. In Hebrew, we call them Tehillim. A lot of, especially Orthodox Jews, and I think Christians as well, will read them when things are bad. And times so there are 150 chapters of Psalms. Probably know that the 23rd Psalm is often read at funerals, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's a pretty famous one. But all sorts of Psalms. A lot of the Psalms are part of the prayer book of prayers in Judaism.
And for good, and for good.
What?
I said, and for good, Psalms are said.
And for good too, yeah, for good too, and for healing, and yeah, read a lot of Psalms. So then you've got the 5 scrolls. So you've got Esther, which we talked about, the most famous one that we read on Purim. That's the story of Purim. Ruth is often read on Shavuot when the Torah was given, and that's the first person who ever converted to Judaism. So really interesting, the ancestor of King David. Lamentations, very sad. We read it on Tisha B'Av. It goes to the story of the destruction of the temple. Very gory, very bloody, very sad. Sad stuff. Song of Songs reads like a very erotic love poem. It's supposed to be a metaphor about the love between God and the Jewish people, but really reads very much about between a man and a woman. Very romantic stuff in there, often read on Passover. And Ecclesiastes is read on Sukkot. It's called Kohelet. It's about life's impermanence. So if you guys know the song by the birds, to every season, there's a season, turn, there's a season. That's straight from Ecclesiastes. Right. Questions? I know I am throwing so much information at you, and I know that's true. I know, I'm watching them. Questions, comments? Is this interesting? Is this helping you frame some of the stuff a little bit? Yeah. All right, we're gonna go into the oral law. Remember, I told you the Mishnah was written in kind of almost outline fashion, right? So you would need a teacher to talk to. So there's 6 volumes of it, 6 tractates, written down by Judah the Prince, Yehuda Nasi, in 200 CE. And it's kind of by subject, right? So there's 6 volumes. So the first one is Moed. Moed means holidays, so it's about holidays and Shabbat. The second one, Zra'im, seeds, is about agriculture in ancient Israel, and about sacrifices. And one of the tractates there, Brachot, is about blessings, and it has all the rules of blessings. Just interesting case in point. I know that usually before you eat economy, probably you say Hamotzi, right? It's a blessing before food. Hamotzi is specifically a prayer you see before you eat bread, but it also can be a catch-all to anything you're eating with it. But there are a whole bunch of different blessings that you say before you eat. So you know, bread in a meal, there's one blessing for cookies and cake, and there's another one for stuff that grows on the tree, and there's another one that's stuff that goes on the ground, and then there's one that's just a general one. There are a lot of different blessings, very complicated whole thing, so that's all. Then you've got Nezikim, which is damages. This is civil law. This is like tort law. If an ox gores your cow, you know, how much does the person have to pay you for the ox and the cow, or if you steal something, all that's very interesting. And that also includes Pirkei Avot, which I think economy we've studied sometimes, right? The ethics of the fathers, you know, a lot of good folk wisdom. Nashim is all about stuff between the sexes, about marriage, about divorce, about how that's handled. Kedoshim is about sacrifices, and Torot is about purity and impurity. So, as I was saying before, the stuff that was added to it, then the discussion the rabbis had about what's in those 6 volumes become the Talmud. Okay, so that's the Gemara is the commentary, so the Mishnah, because the Gemara makes the Talmud. So in there's a lot of Jewish laws about how you do things, but there are also these tangents like you cannot imagine. So they start out talking about one thing and they are suddenly talking about something else and go on for 2 pages about something unrelated to what they started with, but really fascinating discussion. So it is just kind of all over the place. There's some of it that's more Agadah, which is like folklore and wisdom and story type, and then there's something that's much more like law-based. I have the names of different commentators here. You've got the Tanaim and the Amorim, which are the different parts in it. But I wanted to leave time to talk about the Shulchan Aruch, because this is really important, that was published in the 1500s. Okay, so the 1500s, this guy named Joseph Caro came around and said, this is confusing, right? If I want to know whether or not this chicken is kosher or not, because I found a blemish on its lungs when I was checking it, where do I find it? The Talmud is 19, tractates long, and it's got all these, and it's not organized, and there's no index where I can look and find out the answer. Like, if I am not a big scholar rabbi, how do I know what to do? And so Joseph Caro said, I'm going to organize this into a code of Jewish law. Okay, Shulchan Aruch literally means the set table. So somebody was asking before about like who decides today. The Shulchan Aruch is the basis of Jewish practice like across the board. So whether you've got Jews from different parts of the world, or they're Hasidic, or they're modern Orthodox, or whatever, what the Shulchan Aruch says the law is kind of the this is where we go. This is the go-to. It's much more organized. It has, there's a table of contents and they're organized, and you can say, okay, I want to know about this chicken, or I want to know, and there's a lot of very specific laws about things you wouldn't think there are laws about, like what order you put your shoes on in, which one you put on first, which side you tie first, like it's in there. It's in there. Like this, like almost every part of your given life is like governed by it, and all the laws are there. And guess what? There are a bunch of commentaries written by rabbis about the Shulchan Aruch too. So that's like really, really important there, and I wanted to mention that that's there. And then finally, you've got the Zohar. So the Zohar is the book of Jewish mysticism, written in the 2nd century by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, later appears in the 13th century in Spain from Moshe Leon, so where it came from, I don't know. But it has got, instead of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, which is very practical, here's what you do, boom, 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 boom. This is like this really esoteric, spiritual stuff about why things happen the way they do and what's going on in heaven, and like all these really complicated things. So complicated that you're not even supposed to study it until you're 40 years old. Like before you're 40 years old, you are too young to understand it. And you shouldn't be studying the Zohar until like you understand everything else, okay? So the Zohar is the basis of Jewish mysticism, which is called Kabbalah. And somehow in pop culture, in pop American culture, the last 10 years, 15 years, it kind of became really cool to study. Like Madonna got really into it and was studying, and there are like these Kabbalah centers that pop up and people study it. I would say I've just scratched the surface and studied a little bit of Kabbalah, but not a lot. The idea that somebody would like skip over all the other stuff here and then just jump to try and understand that, I mean, it'd be like never learning arithmetic and trying to study calculus. Like, it jumps way ahead, but that's what that is. All right, I said a lot.
7 minutes.
You got 7 minutes. Ask me questions. What did I not cover? What are you confused with?
I'm interested in the Torah because I've never seen one before, but like you said, do they have like the English, like you can read it, the Torah in English too? No version, no sign like that?
Is there an English version of it, you said?
The Torah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay.
So if you go in, I'm sure in the library there, they would have it, and it really is, it's the same as what you're gonna find in your Christian Bible, it just stops soon. So whether you get a Hebrew version of it, or, it doesn't really matter, it's the same text.
Mhm.
Although honestly, the translation you get matters, right? Some of them are easier to read than others. My opinion is any of them that are saying be and now and though and like, that's very hard to read. I'd rather find a more readable one. And you also find some translations build the interpretation into the translation. So the ones that, I read some of these sometimes, but the ones that suddenly will put a bunch of stuff in parentheses and add all that stuff is often their interpretation of what it means and not what the actual text says. So I would say, I was suggesting one, if you were just starting out to translation, my favorite in terms of readability, and I've used it with kids as young as 4th grade, but it's still the whole text
You
there,
said
is called
readability?
the Living Torah.
Oh, really?
And it's
Okay.
by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. And I think it's a really,
You know, Amazon.
yeah, you can get it on Amazon. I think it's a really readable translation. Art Scroll is also really good. Art Scroll has a lot of commentary in it, right? So if you're just starting out, you really just want the text, like it just depends on where you're starting out. I was telling Abigail on the way here, there's a quote that says from a rabbi named Ben Bagbag, love saying his name. Rabbi Ben Bagbag said, turn it and turn it again, because everything is found within it. Right? You can keep reading the Torah. We do it every year. We start over again. We read again and again, year after year after year. Every time you read it, you're going to see something different. And some of it is about ourselves, right? When I read the story of the binding of Isaac, right? When Abraham almost kills Isaac. When I was a kid and read that, I was thinking about it from Isaac's point of view, right? When I got to be a parent and I read it, I thought of it as a parent's point of view, you know? I'm sure that God willing, someday, hopefully soon, when I become a grandparent, right? Then I will read it still again differently, like how would, you know, the grandparent, like, and just anything in your life that's going on, or what's happening in politics, or what's happening, like, all these things affect the way that we read it and what we get. More questions,
Can I make a comment?
please.
I think like you were talking about all the details and it can sound silly to think about the details of how you're tying your shoes or, you know, things like that. How you wash your hands, you know, different things, but it's because there's meaning in all of it. And so I think that's important to know that Judaism pays such attention to detail because there's such deep meaning in all these ways that you can find meaning and elevate it to a point that you want to have purpose in why you're putting on your shoe, right? You're thinking about a purpose, not just I'm doing this because I'm getting dressed. It's like there can be a higher purpose to that.
That's beautiful, thank you. And I also want to add to that, maybe think about it. According to tradition, there are no extra words in the Torah. So any word that's in there is there for a reason, which leads to a lot of the interesting conversations about the rabbi. Why did they use this word and not that word? You know, why is there, it just seems like there's an extra word. What does that mean and what questions does that raise? So like, and you can read it really carefully, really close text reading, you know, line by line, sentence by sentence. When people study it, they often, that they could spend a week on one chapter, you know, really going line by.
Any comments or questions online? No.
Okay, so like, it's gonna sound like a silly question, because you were talking about
No
like
silly
the,
question.
about like the commentary on the side and things like that. But like, it's done now, right? Like, there's no one else adding commentary to the Torah anymore. Like, it's like, yep, this is it. Like, we're done adding to it. If you want to go write your own book on what you think it means, go ahead. But like,
Right, so nobody is gonna add to the Talmud, right? That
Right, like-
volume of the Talmud, nobody is adding to that.
like we're done.
But lots of commentaries about what the Talmud says, right?
Right.
And the other books are gonna be published about what the Talmud said, and books about that and books about that. There's also a whole nother genre of writing called responsa, which literally is what it sounds like, a response, right? Somebody writes a letter to a rabbi and says, what do I do about this situation? The rabbi writes a letter back and those letters get published. And there's some really interesting ones, like there's some that go back to the Spanish Inquisition in Spain, right? Like, you know, I'm gonna be killed if I don't convert. Can I, you know, pretend to convert to Catholicism and still light Shabbat candles in my basement? You know, like, what do I do? Like all these different questions, you know, I'm living in rural America in 1850 and there's no oil around. How do I circumcise my son? You know, like all these questions about what do I do in this situation? You know, I need a heart transplant and the rabbi wants to give me a pig valve. Is it okay to have a pig valve even though pig's not kosher? You know, all these like great questions and they get put in books. And by the way, can go online, and there's an online version of this today, right? There's a couple of websites. One's called asktherabbi.com, but I think there are other ones too. You have a question, you can ask the question, there's a rabbi who'll get back and answer you. It's really interesting stuff. So I guess what I want to say, and it's a really important point to end on, is that in many ways, Jewish law is a living, breathing thing. So yes, it's done, and that nobody's going back and adding to the Bible. But in terms of the learning and the developing of law and where it goes and how it evolves, I don't think it'll ever be. Right? If they create pig meat in a test tube, right, and it's 3D printed, and it really doesn't come from a pig, but it tastes exactly like a pig, is kosher. Or if they do the same thing with beef. It's considered meat.
Chicken bits are not kosher, are kosher, because they're not really.
Because they're not, yeah, but I'm talking about the ones that are made like from stem cells, right?
Yeah, like there's.
Is that meat gonna be, and rabbis are discussing, is that meat gonna be kosher? And if it is kosher, is it considered meat? Or is it not considered meat? And could it really be meat because nobody slaughtered it? Like, these big questions that big rabbis, way greater minds than me, are trying to figure it out. So that, I don't think there'll ever be an end to those questions, right? You know, if people end up living on Mars, when does Shabbat start and stop? Like, how does that work?
Yeah,
A lot of questions.
There's just like, I don't know, people like with technology changing all the time, or like the world changing, like there's gonna be different interpretations of all of
But
it.
there are also like huge rabbis in different branches of Judaism that people will then go under that umbrella. Like I relate to that rabbi and his interpretation or whatever. And then from that, there are other rabbis that are under that umbrella and they go to, you know, so it's like these umbrellas of scholars.
It's complicated. And they say that once the Messiah comes, all the questions.
You know everything like.
Thank you.
Thank you. Guys, I just want to say. Stop
Wait,
recording.
hold on, okay, no.
I just stop recording, then you can say it.
Thank you. If you are online, I will send you a very, very short assignment. I will send it today with the recording of this, in case you need to refer to it. Next week, we have our midwinter. Please come, we'll have dinner. How to use AI responsibly as a teacher. I think it'll be really helpful. Give you some time. 5:30 right here in the community hall. And 2 weeks in our next lesson, we're February 5th with Rabbi Moish Simon doing it all about mitzvot part 2.
That was the part.
Yep.
So I'm-
So, and then we have a babka on the 13th at the shul.
And the salute to Jewish educators.
And that's in March. And it's a little, but the link is live if you would like to RSVP. So Jewish educators, March 9th, 3 to 5. Please be there.
We need to know RSVPs for food orders for midwinter.
Yeah,
Yes.
remind me, 35.
What are they? So some of those you have to register for, like, next week.
Is that what you're talking about?
Show the, you can see.